It's not easy instilling a single episode of a show, with only 2 prior episodes to build off of, with such a complete and overwhelming display of emotional and meaningful moments. Episode 3 of Arcane achieves this. It's the first in the series that commands our full undivided attention, that commands our respect and pushes our sympathy to its limits. It's a singularly transformative episode that forces the characters to reveal to us their most fundamental nature, the deepest depths of their hearts, and puts these qualities to the greatest test. Unbearable circumstances force the characters to tap into parts of them that have been shielded, discarded, and even redefine their whole existence in order to keep a grasp on the world that has been reshaped around them. I was deeply moved by this episode, and I'm excited to delve into it here. So with that said, let's explore what went into achieving greatness. Quickly though, if you like this type of content and want to see more, it's important that you subscribe to the channel. I appreciate it. Let's first turn our gaze to Powder. She experiences a great deal of loneliness in this episode, which is natural for someone of her age. Her father has been taken, and her sister is forced to leave despite the confliction of family values she's burdened with. As Powder's sister, she must keep her safe. She'd heeded the advice of Vander not to allow Powder to be put in jeopardy by the battles Vi was so determined to fight, and while this may be the most sensible solution, it comes at the cost of Powder's alienation from her sister. It's the pre-scene that sets the stage for the overwhelming sense of abandonment that Powder would come to feel later in the episode. It also triggers the first major signs of Powder's mental instability, as the sense of uselessness that her sister imposes on her builds off of her established insecurities. Hearing her sister, her advocate, tell her she can't help because her weapons are crap causes her to break down. Powder is ravaged by this desperation of vital psychological needs for family. While she might be protected, what's at stake in this coming battle is all that she has, her family. Without them, she can't go on. She can't be Powder. This episode shows us that there are other ways of losing someone. Before Vi left, she gave Powder a flare, a way back, a subtle moment that has massive payoff later on. As before Powder can come back, she must reconcile Powder with what she has become, the world that she left behind, with the world distorted by her trauma. Powder left to help her family after finding a ray of hope in her despair, a magical item of great potential, a way for her to be useful, a way for her to protect her family. We'll return to Powder soon, but now I'll talk about Silco and Vander. Silco, like Vi, is chasing respect and freedom. They both want to force Piltover to respect them, and Vander, by submitting to Topside, is taking him and his people in the opposite direction. He remembers the fallout of rebellion, of war, and out of his care for his children and the people of the lanes, he became an anti-revolutionary. But this is taken for weakness. He's viewed by Silco as caged, his true self locked away, stripped of all agency. Because for Vander, there isn't a choice. He's not that man anymore, he's not a fighter. This could be seen as him simply lacking the truth that Silco professes. He hasn't been drowning, or you could say he's succumbed to the water's allure. Silco's wisdom comes from rejecting that embrace, from an all-encompassing madness that drives him to fight with everything that he has, to win by whatever means necessary. It is his tenacity, his cunning and ruthlessness that has made him the man he is, and he wants that for the man he used to respect, the man that taught him this lesson. Silco has refined, bottled, and enhanced this missing part of Vander's character. Shimmer offers a choice to unleash the monster within to the extreme in an animalistic, monstrous form, externalizing this inner human characteristic in dramatic fashion. A path to respect, a path to freedom. Take the respect, fulfill your dream, because victory is for those who will do whatever it takes to win. Silco orchestrates many events of this episode, partly to free Vander from his daze, to show him what he really is, and to do that he needs to shackle Vander, as to make him understand what it's like to be powerless, to be incapable of doing what he must, to be unable to protect his family, bringing him toward the state of desperation that forced Silco to evolve. And I think that had this plan from Silco gone uninterrupted, we would have seen Vander break out of his restraints and face off with the monster, which is a fight we got to see anyway, but that's how I like to think Silco envisioned it. So Vander is locked up, and we wait for the kids to come to the rescue, but they fall into Silco's trap, and so everyone must scurry to save the day through their own methods. Now the key word for this scene is tension. For whatever tension there was before, this scene has magnitudes more, and it's achieved through multiple points of tension, multiple conditions for success, each dependent on one another, where the endgame is saving all of their lives before the clock runs out. It's about as high stakes as it gets. Now sometimes using character death as a tool to generate tension can lose the audience a bit, because more often than not, the show is committed to the survival of all its central characters, which isn't true of Arcane, but at the original time of watching, we might not know how committed this show is to these characters, which does leave us with uncertainty, which becomes another point of tension, and by this episode, Arcane has already established itself as being on the darker side of things, witnessing swift, brutal murders earlier in the episode, and it is somewhat common to leverage, say, the death of a father figure, a teacher, in order to push the unready students into an unforgiving world, and making them evolve in that way. which does happen, so this was definitely on the table, even if we didn't believe that things would end as bad as they did, which became an extra dessert this episode offers on top of this great tension. I appreciate how each of Vander's kids are using skills very much connected to their character identity in the effort to save their father. Vi the brawler is forced into a series of brawls where she shows extreme prowess and resolve, a lot of intensity and hype in that scene. Milo has to pick the locks holding Vander, this being his primary skill shown in the first episode. Clagger, the big man, has to brute strength his way through the wall, and most importantly Powder has to jinx it. She has to fail because Powder is a failure, and it's a dazzling, disorienting, disturbing failure. It's the completed manifestation of this namesake quality of Powder's character. There's a level of beauty in this scene. Powder feels euphoric, but it's contradicted by this tragedy in the making. Her misguided sense of accomplishment is undercut by her greatest failure, and it creates strong emotional confusion. I'll call this a tonal paradox. It's an overwhelming thing to watch because this is cutting directly into that high tension scene we've been exploring, detonating that tension and everything in the room. This entire conflict is undone in an instant, and we're left bathing in this shock and awe as the moment is slowed down to a crawl. This part of the storyline is masterfully juxtaposed with Jace's journey in this episode, where we witness the two sides of magic. On one side, controlled and beautiful, playful and elevating, where Jace has at last had his life-changing breakthrough, basking in the beauty of the magic. On the other hand, it's uncontrolled, chaotic, destructive, and depressing, where Powder is also basking in the beauty of the magic, except she causes this life-shattering tragedy. Magic is life-giving and life-ending. An innocent, well-wishing girl with a deep desire to help her family kills that family, all in blissful ignorance. An aspiring scientist with everyone against him, on the verge of suicide, makes a discovery that earns him status and the admiration of society. This is a scene that sets the plot, the character relations, the mind of those characters, and the viewer on fire. Nothing will ever be the same. The intensity continues to accumulate as we return to Vander, now in the fallout of Powder's destruction, injured, and he must shoulder the burden of his child's failure, protect his family against overwhelming odds. And to achieve that, dying for a cause isn't enough, he must fight for one. With every grunt, grimace, and gesture, the determination and resolve of Vander is signaled, while Vi is pinned to the ground and watches, helplessly, as Vander had watched her earlier. At last we get to see the real Vander, the one we've anticipated, that had been hinted at many times prior. Despite this fight being a slug-out between Vander and the Shimmer monster, the real battle is between Silco and Vander, with the question being which is the greater monster, Silco's abomination or this old man on a warpath. With every strike from Vander, Silco's confidence is drained, and as we see the hero's success draw closer, a sense of building relief starts to stir. But it's a fair battle. The monster strikes back, turning the tables around, pushing the grid of Vander to its brink. He psychs himself up, exhibiting an animalistic drive as blood spills from his mouth. And before we get to find out just how far Vander's immense will can take him against the limits of his body, Silco steps in, stabs his brother in the back. Vander turns to him, grabs him by the throat, and we get a terrific historical reemergence. The narrative symmetry is pristine, coming at the perfect moment, the peak of our conflict. With the adrenaline pumping, our fight is abruptly given a thought-provoking further dimension. It's made particularly salient here that Vander has been revived to what he was, being in the same spot he was at when he was the man that Silco admired, which was Silco's plan for him to begin with. Vander has earned his respect again, silently bringing them closer together, making it a bittersweet victory for Silco. Silco, who has primarily utilized his cunning and intellect to fulfill his antagonistic agenda up to this point, is able to showcase his persistence and tenacity physically as well, bringing more respectability to him as a villain. Temporarily winning the battle of fists and knives, reinstantiating the truth of real power not coming to the strongest or the fastest, but to the one who will do whatever it takes to win. We're starting to see how well Arcane recurs and intensifies its themes, solidifying their value. This trend continues as the camera turns to Vander, defeated, powerless, and soon to witness the death of his daughter. But now he does have a choice. The greater monster is knocking at the door, asking to be let in. He's in the desperate state Silco found himself, and must do whatever it takes to win. He must become the monster in order to do what he must. And from this we get a power far beyond what we had seen before, Shimmer being the accentuated external representation of this inner beast Silco had become in touch with, and according to him it's what we really are at the end of the day, and once again the real power Silco spoke of triumphs. Our hero saves his daughter, letting his enemy escape, and our beloved Vander fades away, triggering a major negative emotional payoff from all the relationship building we had between Vander and Vi, every lesson he gave, every heroic and singularly selfless act of Vander leading up to this. We're leaving a town without a leader, and we're leaving children without siblings, without a father. It's a cold world that we've stepped into. Vander leaves us with the words, "Take care of Powder," and this message permeates the core conflict of the show, with more grief, as this show is centered around the destruction of Powder, Vi being a major part of why Powder was lost, so she's failing to fulfill the final wish of her father, on top of losing the only person in the world she has left. Powder and Vi are in mutual disbelief from this. This is a good example of how well the show gives precise insight into the psychology of the characters, as Powder instinctually shakes her head, looks away, rejecting the reality before her. More road markers of her descent into madness. This day was ultimately too much for Powder's psyche to reconcile with, as Vi is attacking her for these innate qualities of her. The one person who shielded Powder from this flaw that plagued her is shoving it in her face as she is given the blame for this atrocity. A little girl has caused the death of her family because of what she is, not simply a mistake. She is the problem. Vi strikes her sister, blooding her fist, then looks at her hand as her overwhelming emotional reactions are interrupted by the harm she has done. As Vander told her, she can't solve her problems with her fists. It could come at the cost of her family. It could cost her Powder. She's betraying her father's wish, and so Vi is driven to distance herself from Powder. "I need you," Powder screams. This is the completed manifestation of the problem of abandonment that had brought Powder severe trauma earlier, and now for Powder, she has lost everything, left with nothing, because of who she is, and so she is in a perfect position to be remade. That insurmountable hole that has been drilled into her heart will naturally seek to fill itself back. This is where Silco steps in, and he will be the one to fulfill Vander's wishes, the man who taught him his most important lesson, his brother. He will take in this fatherless child, as Vander had done originally, a lovely parallel between the two. We've seen Silco's determination, but now we get to see his heart. Silco is a particularly humanized and understandable villain. "We will show them all," Silco says. It's a reconstruction of the journey for respect that Powder had with Vi, a near-perfect replacement, albeit a dark and distorted one. The death of love has birthed a deep hatred in Powder, and she won't be Powder any longer. These demons will stay with her. She'll wear this monster on her heart and become Jinx. This episode was incredibly enjoyable from start to finish, easy 10 out of 10 episode. It had everything to the extreme: hype, sadness, character development, visceral demonstrations of its themes, challenges, triumphs, and failures. It has great tension, establishes Silco as a complex villain, it has parallels, a shocking twist, it looks amazing, it's a perfect jump off to propel us through a time skip. It has everything, and so I had to get on here and talk about it. Arcane on top, probably the show I'm most excited to get the next season of. I'm gonna be making more Arcane vids, many more if this does well, so subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I'll catch you later. Woski out.